From LA Gateway, come to the right place to talk things Big Ten. Come to Penn Ted Live.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Big Ten Ted Live. Did anything happen today? Did we have any news today? Oh, yes, we did. We had a lot of news, and we're going to get to that news here in the program here tonight. Very excited to be along with you, talking Big Ten schedule 2024, 2025, 2026, 2027, and of course, we can't forget about 2028. So we're going to be talking about that here tonight. If it is your first time coming aboard Big Ten Ted Live tonight, or the channel just in general, subscribing helps you know when I upload a preview video, when I upload a reaction video. Got plenty of those, of course, when we're in the heart of Big Ten football season, when we go live like this. And also ring that bell, you get a notification on your phone. You are right here right away for all of that. So hitting that subscribe button really allows you to be a part of all the stuff that I'm doing here on the channel throughout the year. All right, so what are we going to be talking about? Who are we going to be talking to? That's what we want to get to here tonight. So we're talking schedule. The Big Ten schedule release, of course, went down today. Big Ten Network, kind of under the radar a little bit. It just kind of popped up, kind of just happened, but we'll take it. A lot of people have really been clamoring for this schedule for a very, very long time. So we are going to be talking to Greg Flugaur from College Football's Peek Around the Corner. Okay, that is coming up here in mere minutes. Going to be talking to him about a lot of things Big Ten and this schedule, all right? And then we're going to be talking, you know, the reason we are in this situation at this time of year is because of Oregon, and it's because of Washington. Okay, and that's who we're going to be talking. We're going to be talking to Doug Scott from the QB11 show, the co-host. I was on that podcast earlier this week. For my money, it's the best Duck one out there. So we're going to be talking to him about the Oregon side of the schedule, and then we're going to be talking to our good buddy Roman Tomashoff from Sports Illustrated, Fansided, and Locked On Huskies from Washington as well. It should be a great night talking the future of the Big Ten Conference. Also, if it's your first time dropping by Big Ten Ted Live tonight, a great way to support the channel as well as hit that join button to become a member of the Big Ten Ted Champions Club memberships. Got some perks that kind of go along with it as well. Helps me invest and kind of do more of these live shows and videos and everything like that. Also, I do have a Big Ten Ted Discord where you can talk Big Ten football 24/7, 365. Whether I upload a video, whether I do a live stream, doesn't matter. You can talk with your friends about everything Big Ten. That Discord link, it's like a message board, right? That is for free, and it is in the live chat right now if you want to join that and if you want to check that out. Before we get into Greg, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the passing of Dick Butkus. Boy, what a legend. What a legend, especially in the state of Illinois. In college football, professional football, and football in general. You can't talk about football. You can't talk about football on the defensive side of the football. You can't talk about the linebacker position without mentioning Dick Butkus. So obviously, R.I.P. To Dick Butkus, an Illinois legend, a Chicago Bears legend, right? When it comes to football, Dick Butkus is definitely the name in the state of Illinois. The Dick Butkus Award, right? He's left his mark on the sport of college football with that award as well. A lot of Big Ten players have taken home that award kind of over the years. So rest in peace to a true legend, not only the Big Ten, but throughout all of college football. So this show is about the schedules. That's what this show really is about. And right now I am pleased to be welcomed the host, the founder, some people call him the Godfather. I've heard that one thrown out there as well. Ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to be welcomed by Mr. Greg Flugaur from College Football's Peek Around the Corner. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing fantastic. People also know me as the fat guy from Minnesota. I'm all fired up. Let's get it going. I also want to, first of all, thank Ted for letting me be on his show once again. And I also want to give my condolences to Dick Butkus, his family, his loved ones, a legend. I imagine that the Illinois-Nebraska game tomorrow night, Friday night, is going to have a special tribute to him before the game and probably at halftime. So that gives a little bit more juice to Illinois, I think. I think they're going to play as tough as they can for Dick Butkus and the whole family. Boy,
you can't tell tough. That's the word when you talk about toughness in the game of football, and we hear that word really bounced around a lot, right, in today's day and age, and really over the entirety of the history of football. No one is toughness more than Dick Butkus, of course, over there, the former linebacker at Illinois, and the Chicago Bears as well. Okay, Greg, we had a little bit of news today. So here's how it went down, ladies and gentlemen. The last time Greg was on this program, it also involved Oregon and Washington, right? And that we had today's announcement because of Oregon and Washington. So the last time Greg and I got together on a live show, I'm DMing Greg, say, hey, you want to be on the show? You want to talk about this, right? Oregon and Washington. I told him to wait off until I got back from Canada up north. It didn't work out that way. It happened on a Friday. I DM'd Greg from downtown Banff, Alberta, Canada. Today, Greg kind of sent me a DM on the way to work in Blaine, Minnesota, and a little bit different in terms of scenery. But either way, we're getting together that way here on the show tonight. Basically, he told me, keep your head on a swivel, Ted. Keep your head on a swivel. Something's about to happen. And something did happen. Can you... was this something that was always going to happen kind of within the season and at this time of year, or did it just end up coming about this way? Or kind of talk about the timing that the schedule release happened?
I was told that, now I guess it's semantics, whatever. I was under the belief that this was going to drop late October or early November. But then again, it is still going to be dropped in late October. The schedule, the actual schedule, the dates of the games. Gotcha. I've been told again today that's still going to happen. The matchups, where they release the matchups, I was not expecting it today. I heard some rumblings, and I checked with a couple prime sources, and they came back to me with a literal thumbs up. It's happening today. And so then that's, I was able to alert you to get your head on a swivel. I didn't know it was going to be 5 seasons worth of matchups.
Okay.
I was thinking 2024, 2025. So, and I was trying to get confirmed that, selfishly speaking, as a Gopher, I was trying to get it confirmed that Minnesota was still going to go out to UCLA and play in the Rose Bowl for the first time since 1962. And things happened so fast, I couldn't even get that confirmed. We still are going out to UCLA. But something new dropped in that schedule for my beloved Golden Gophers, Ted. And that is USC is coming to play at Minnesota.
And this is 2024.
Yes, sir.
This is 2024. So let's throw it up here on screen. There is the 2024 schedule. Continue, Greg.
So that home game, Minnesota USC, and I have I used my YouTube channel today, Peek Around the Corner. It's a national college football YouTube channel, right?
Yep.
But once in a while, my biasness of the Gophers leaks on in, and that happened today because I was yelling and screaming, pleading to Tony Petitti to schedule that USC Minnesota game in November. Do it, Tony. Do it. Do it. Do it, Tony.
I had to put you back on camera for
that game in September, November, out in the cold. Let's get it done.
That's not going to happen, right, though?
I know that's not going to happen. I'm pleading here. I'm pleading. I'm using your channel as well.
I know. And I feel the same way. And I know there's been a lot of discussion as it pertains to weather for these West Coast teams kind of coming in. And Minnesota is really one of the very few schools. I think you'd maybe throw in Wisconsin in there. Not a lot of these schools, I don't think. When you look into the month of November, it doesn't get too frigid cold, that kind of thing. I will say this, though. I think it was was it last year when Minnesota played Iowa? I think it was the week before Thanksgiving, if I'm not mistaken, and it was in the single digits here in Minneapolis.
Yeah, and that's and every time I talk about this, I get Washington and Oregon fans, which is fine because they're not probably paid attention to Minnesota games in November, correct? Yeah. So, but now maybe they will, and the weather is different here in November than it even is out in Seattle and Washington. While they're in the 40s, we're going to be colder and windier and snowier. The winter starts earlier here, so I'm hoping. Come on, first. Now, I got a little scared. I got to be honest with you. I got a little scared, Ted, as I looked at the schedule more from a Minnesota standpoint. Minnesota always begins the Big Ten season, or not the Big Ten season, but their season on a Thursday night.
Yep.
Right? It's different than all the other Big Ten schools, except for maybe Rutgers also does it sometimes on a Thursday. But Minnesota traditionally starts the season out on a Thursday night. It's been going on for years. Sometimes Minnesota plays against a Big Ten opponent on that Thursday night. This year they played Nebraska. A couple years ago, they played the Ohio State Buckeyes when Mohamed Ibrahim had 163 yards in the middle of the third quarter, and then he tore his Achilles. So when I was looking at this schedule, I'm thinking, is there a better perfect way for Minnesota Golden Gophers to start out their 2024 schedule to bring in the new era of Big Ten football, having USC versus Minnesota that first Thursday night, right, game to open the season? But I was told by somebody, I would just call an administrator at the University of Minnesota, saying that when Minnesota has 4 home games and not 5, when they have 4 home games, they usually 4 home Big Ten games. They don't play that Thursday night against a Big Ten opponent. So right. I think that's out of the question.
Okay, yeah. So let's talk about something. I see a comment here, and I got to address this. And I'm going to pull it up right now. Our guy, I love him, Ohio State fan, hummus hero. Pullman, Washington, Boulder, Salt Lake City, and nobody, and I mean nobody, loves the mountains more than this guy. Okay? Yeah. I go there every summer. It's beautiful. It's awesome. Minnesota cold. It's a little bit different. It's a little bit different. It is frigid when it's windy. That's a whole nother thing as well when you factor that in as well. There's something a little bit different from mountain cold versus maybe Minnesota cold.
And it comes in earlier. Yeah. I mean, go ahead and look at the November average temps of the state of Washington, the state of Oregon, the state of Minnesota. We did that in the live show because I had so many calls on it, and there's a pretty big gap difference. So now, again, sometimes you have beautiful weather in the Thanksgiving third week in November, Minnesota, Wisconsin. And that game I don't think is going to be replaced on the schedule, Ted, right? I think it's going to be Minnesota, Wisconsin to end their season every single year. But that second November, that first week in November, can get real cold in Minnesota. But the rivalry games, Ted, I'm talking like the permanent rivalry games. Yep. Ohio State, Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Northwestern, Illinois. They're always going to play. Some of those games that always traditionally finish the season, I think some of those are going to be scattered now throughout the season, right? Like they're not going to have Oregon versus Washington at the end of the season. They're not going to have all the most prominent rivalry games all play at the end of the season. I hope they don't. I don't think they will.
Let's take a look at.
Are we going to get Indiana and Purdue finishing the season all the time? Those two teams playing against each other?
I would say that specifically Old Oak and Bucky game, I would say yes. We've got some Big Ten protected rivalries here that we're kind of taking a look at. And this is kind of one thing that I really wanted to get to. They only protected what they absolutely needed to protect. And I think that is Oh, and that's kind of what they were doing when we had the USC and UCLA, just them, the Flex Protect Plus model announced earlier this year. They were only protecting what they absolutely needed to, right? You didn't see Ohio State and Penn State. You didn't see maybe a rival like Michigan State and Indiana for the old brass platoon, things like that. So if you kind of take a look, this is the first set of Big Ten protected rivals in there. Iowa still has 3 protected rivals. Greg, what was your thoughts on the Hawkeyes still having 3, which included the Nebraska game there?
I don't see how they couldn't have all 3 of those, right? I mean, which one would you eliminate? It's unfathomable to me. Yeah.
You can't eliminate Iowa, Minnesota. Obviously, you can't eliminate Floyd. You can't eliminate the battle for the Heartland Trophy, Iowa and Wisconsin. Even though it's probably not Iowa, Minnesota, it is still a very significant battle. It's a trophy game. It's been going on forever.
Yeah.
And Iowa, Nebraska. Yeah. So that's one that was maybe on the edge, but this is Nebraska's biggest game every single year, and this has become I will say this. I'm kind of glad Nebraska was able to get the win after this past year, after Iowa was able to win so many consecutive games, because that was kind of the thing that maybe certain, like the Iowa fan base, well, this isn't a true rivalry because we win all the time. Right. Yeah. But now Nebraska, it's able to kind of go back and forth a little bit. That has turned into a great contest. It's Nebraska's Black Friday game like they had with Colorado back in the Big 12. You can't eliminate it. I just think those two fan bases are really starting to hate each other. We can't take this one away now.
No, they hate each other. Yeah.
Let's go into the second round of protected rivals here as well. Maryland-Rutgers stays as a particular rival. Of course, you got the Paul Bunyan Trophy, Michigan and Michigan State, Michigan, Ohio State, Paul Bunyan, Zach's, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. This right here, the bottom 2, is where I wanted to get your take next here, Greg. Oregon and Washington, USC, UCLA. We know those would be protected. Some people may have been surprised that the entire pod of 4 out there, so to speak, was not protected due to travel concerns. Based on what you know, and maybe if you don't know, you can offer your opinion. Were you surprised at all that all 4, like UCLA against Washington, Oregon, and USC, that those games were not protected as well for the travel?
If you would have asked me 6 months ago, I would have said that would have been a pod, right?
Okay.
But over in the last month, there's strong indications that there wasn't going to be a pod of those 4. But in the non-football, I mean, all the other sponsor sports, there's going to be a pod of those 4, right?
Yeah.
Baseball, they're going to play each other more often. Basketball, they're always going to be home and away. All those, every other sport besides football, that's going to be a pod out there. No question about it.
Yeah, so we'll see, and we're going to have a few other guys on later. Doug Scott representing Oregon, Roma Tomashoff representing Washington, and they've got especially Doug's really broke that schedule down to see how often those Oregon, UCLA, Washington, and against USC those games are going to happen. And the way I see it, they left the Pac-12, they joined the Big Ten to get big games against Ohio State, against Michigan, against Wisconsin, against Minnesota, against Penn State, against those teams like that. And I think, and we're going to get into the TV side of this because we all know this is what drives it, because I think TV networks would rather see USC and Ohio State played more regularly than, say, USC versus Washington, right? Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yes. And yes. And also, I brought up the example today of the USC Washington. USC Washington, I think they play against each other in 2024. I don't know if you want to check that real quick.
Let's pull it up here.
I'm pretty sure they do because I used this game as an example. USC Washington 2024.
2024, Washington actually plays all 3 West Coast schools, and I was kind of talking with some folks beforehand. That is the only time when a West Coast school plays all of the other 3 West Coast schools. Out of any of the schools throughout these entire 5 years is Washington in 2024.
Now, coming back to the networks, that USC-Washington game, this year they play each other. They have yet to play each other. That's going to draw big ratings. because look at you got Caleb Williams, Michael Penix Jr. Both teams are undefeated. I don't know what their records are going to be when they eventually play each other, but it's going to be a big game. It's going to get big viewership. But annually, you know what? In Pac-12 country, what the biggest problem with the Pac-12, the reason why it dissolved is because Pac-12 country did not watch Pac-12 football in the same way Big Ten country watches Big Ten football, the same way that SEC country watches SEC football. So I think one of the biggest impactful, earliest things that USC and Washington and Oregon and UCLA fan bases are going to recognize, they're going to see, wow, this is different, is that when Washington and USC play each other in a Big Ten conference game, Big Ten country is going to watch that game. They're going to be interested in that game. You're going to get more Twitter or X involvement, message board involvements. People are going to be throwing elbows more. You're going to get a rivalry set up with the school that you never thought you were going to get a rivalry set up with, right? It might be Rutgers that you hate 5 years from now. Big Ten country watches those other Big Ten games. I'm not saying in the numbers of, the game, the Buckeyes in Michigan. I'm talking about every game's just juiced up a little bit more because we watch each other more than the Pac-12, and nothing against the Pac-12 institutions. Great institutions, very good fan bases, but they did not watch each other. They did not care. They didn't have that desire, that passion in the Big Ten country. It's just there.
Yeah, absolutely. You're not going to get a ton of Stanford fans and Cal fans watching Washington, USC.
Yes. Yeah, but you're going to get a Big Ten tag, Wisconsin. People in Wisconsin are, depending on the race, depending on how teams are doing, that evil sign. But all that stuff that goes on, and, people are going to be watching USC and Washington within the Big Ten because it's a Big Ten game. And maybe an Illinois is going to play USC next. And so all that plays into it. And I think that's going to be the earliest indication for a USC Trojan fan, for example, that things are a little bit different here. Things are just a little bit different here.
It's a bigger deal. I'm not here saying that football out west isn't a big deal. It is.
Oh,
It is in its bigger programs. USC. Yes. Oregon is a national brand as well. Yeah. Washington has been to a college football playoff, but then when you start to trickle down to your Arizonas, your Arizona States, your Stanfords and Cals, teams like that, I am never going to throw Washington State and Oregon State into that boat. Yeah. I think one thing, to quickly kind of get off the Big Ten tracks just a little bit for just a second, I think one thing that we've learned throughout all of this with them is their fan bases are ready to support their team. Yes. If it's me, I would love to see them in a power conference. It would probably be the Big 12, but it doesn't sound like that's going to happen right now, which is unfortunate, considering where those two programs and where those two schools really are right now. So, but anyway, getting back here to this, I want to talk about TV because that's a big driving force of all of this. Right now, you kind of watch some of these games. I know CBS is in a weird year where they've got the SEC for a lot. They had some Big Ten games earlier. You're probably going to see less of them with the SEC and CBS now in the meat of their schedule here right now. But you got to think bigger games, especially with those West Coast schools, because it was said today that they're going to avoid having West Coast home games in the big noon Saturday slot. So what does this mean specifically for CBS and NBC? You got to think that they might be getting some bigger games, like if USC and Oregon or a Washington hosts maybe the game of the week that week.
Yeah. CBS, NBC absolutely loves the addition of Oregon and Washington, right? Yeah. They're the beneficiaries, what Ted just explained. They are the beneficiaries of this last expansion. By the way, it's Fox Sports who is paying for it. They're, as far as we know, at least right now, maybe that changes years down the line, but it's Fox Sports who threw out this extra $65 million a year to bring in a Washington and Oregon into the conference. and they're not necessarily going to be the one that's benefiting, although they're going to benefit too, because Oregon Ducks are going to buy the Big Ten Network. Washington Duck fans are going to buy the Big Ten Network, and Fox Sports owns 61% of the Big Ten Network. So they're going to benefit it too. So everyone's going to benefit. But as Ted is saying, now you have this plethora, this slate of games that has even more depth, that has even more big brands playing big brands more often. We don't have divisions. So now there's going to be more flexibility. And the pecking order, I still, Ted, maybe you have this information. I still don't quite get all the minutia of how these games are going to be selected through each and every year. For example, it doesn't sound like Fox Sports gets the first pick every single week. And then
that's funny. We're on the same wavelength. I was going to ask you this question as it pertains to what we're seeing this year. Michigan, Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, all big noon Saturday games, yet CBS, I know CBS isn't, but maybe more for NBC this year. Why isn't NBC getting more bigger games? It seems to me like Fox at the beginning of the year says, I get to cherry pick the 3, 4, 5, whatever games I want every year. And then it feels, because I think we saw some NBC games picked at the beginning of the year, some CBS games, and then you get week by week. I
don't have the answers. Okay. I know. Look, 2024 is going to be different than 2023 because we have the whole CBS package.
Yep.
Big Ten, CBS is Big Ten country in 2024 and beyond. So all kind of this changes. I thought when this deal was first put together and announced, signed, sealed, and delivered, in my mind and people I talked to, I thought it was going to be Fox Sports, number one pick every single week. Okay. Maybe an exception here or there. And then NBC and CBS rotates their 2:30 prime time. They rotate the second and third pick. And then Peacock 4 and then BTN, whatever. Or an FS1 gets thrown in there as well.
Sure.
But I don't think that's the case. I've been told, no, when this thing gets going in 2024, there's going to be a week or two, CBS going to get the number one pick. Not
good.
The number what?
That's good. I like that.
3:30 Eastern game. Yeah. And once in a while, an NBC is going to get the number one pick. Not the number one pick overall. In other words, the game, the Buckeyes, Michigan's going to be on Fox.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, but I'm not, maybe nobody knows it, except for outside of the Big Ten offices, how exactly it's going to work.
Yeah, that's a question I had, like I said, even this season. But it sounds like we're still unaware of what exactly is happening right now. And you mentioned BTN and Peacock, which we'll kind of get to in some of those lower tier games as well. But I would love to see it rotate. I know Fox is the big, right? They're the one that spends the most money on this package, it seems. Yeah. And I know CBS and so maybe Fox then should have more picks. But if you play 13 or 14 weeks in a season, maybe Fox has 8 picks, and then you have 4 and 5 for the rest of them. I think that's very important, and I think it's going to depend on, like I said before, if USC is hosting the game against Michigan and it's number 2 against number 5, that game's not going to go on Big Noon because they're not playing at 9 o'clock local time, right? That's just not going to happen, and they've already said that. So I think that's kind of got to factor in this.
And maybe. Ted, maybe we just answered our own question earlier in your show when we said Fox Sports was the one that put out the $65 million to help pay for the Oregon-Washington expansion, even though it seems like CBS and NBC are going to benefit. Well, maybe Fox, that was their way of Fox keeping more control of the selections. Hey, we're paying even more now. I don't know. But then, and then Ted, you've been bringing up the point on and off your air about Friday night games.
Tony mentioned it right here.
How does this affect? Oh, yes, Tony. Tough Tony, I call him. He always comes in with the tough questions that I cannot possibly answer. Go ahead and read it, Ted.
All right. So he's got some good ones. We've got a few in the queue here that I want to get to.
Go ahead.
Fox needs to have a Friday night game every week of the year. And I'm not saying FS1. Let's talk about it. We talked about it off air right before we came on. Fox just said thanks but no thanks to WWE SmackDown going forward, there is a gigantic hole on Friday nights at 8 o'clock. I believe it was 8 o'clock Eastern time, right? A beautiful time to play a Friday night football game, right? So now you've got 4 more teams. You're going to have more games that are going to need to be played. You can't shove, especially in the non-conference games, and even in the conference schedule as well, you can't shove all of these games onto Saturday, right? Someone's going to get buried. Someone's going to get buried. So a Friday night game, especially for those West Coast teams, right? Playing a prime time. I think this is a perfect time to put the number 4 game of the week on a Friday night on Big Fox. Your thoughts?
Well, you remember when this whole Friday night thing came to our consciousness here in Big Ten country. A whole bunch of schools refused to have home games on Friday night because of high school football. You can rattle them off. Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, Nebraska. They're playing Friday night, but they're playing at Illinois. Some of these, and they probably don't like the fact that they're playing Friday night at Illinois. The big time, big brand schools, the biggest ones in the conference right now, do not want to have home games on Friday night. But there is Big Ten games on Friday night. They're scattered throughout the season, as Ted said. Now we're going to be bringing in Washington and Oregon and UCLA. I'm wondering, Ted, if part of the negotiations with Oregon and Washington, especially, is that they're going to have a home game on a Friday night. Both of them, at least, there would only be one home game for both on a Friday night through the season. And Fox, those games would be on Fox. And you're still going to have FS1 games. But to help pay for this expansion, Washington and Oregon having one game at home on a Friday night. What do you think of that?
Well, yeah, I think it's not only Friday nights; it's night games in November. We all know how that's been a big thing as well, and we know the story about Kevin Warren and kind of the lack of communication, kind of coming down to it. You got to think Oregon and Washington, maybe USC and UCLA you could throw in there as well. You got to think these West Coast schools are going to be playing a lot of night games in November. You said it: the Michigans, the Ohio States, the Penn States, the Michigan States. We heard. These are teams that said they don't want to play on Friday, or I should say, night games in November, right? That's been a big thing in the Big Ten for a long time. It's odd, it's weird. I'm very right. We saw Penn State and Michigan State move their game to Ford Field this season because of that very reason. Maybe because I think they were short term. Fixes that they had to make, and then they got to figure out what they're going to do in the long term. And this schedule kind of has, you say, dates and times. Hopefully, are going to definitely dates are kind of coming in the near future here, and that's something that they got to figure out. So,
and I also heard that NBC there is the potential of a flex going into later in the year, where NBC is going to be able to have a flex out of a game and grab a different game. And then everyone's going to have to be more flexible. The Big Ten universities, the fan bases, because your game might get switched. Your Saturday game during the afternoon might get switched to a Saturday night game.
Is that just NBC?
Yeah, that would be just NBC. That is percolating. Nothing official yet, but that could be something that would satisfy NBC as we go on.
So more schedule talk here from Tony. Boy, USC, they have got a schedule and a half. LSU and Notre Dame, I think that's 2024 if I'm not mistaken, that they play those teams as well. Welcome to, I shouldn't say welcome to big boy football. USC, you're a good program. But
Yeah.
man, that is going to be a heck of a schedule. No Caleb Williams. They've got a 5-star Malachi Nelson kind of waiting in the
Yes.
wings. We'll see kind of how things. We know Zachariah Branch has looked outstanding, the freshman playmaker as well. So man, that is going to be a heck of a schedule for the Trojans. I want to talk about this. This is one point that I really wanted to bring up with you, and I actually mentioned it in the comments during your show earlier today. Future scheduling. I know schedules are really planned out very far in advance. But whether it's the Big Ten, it could be the SEC, right, with Texas and OU coming in as well. You got to think for the Big Ten specifically, there's going to be a whole lot of FCS, there's going to be a whole lot of MAC teams, and there's going to be a whole lot of Mountain West teams on non-conference scheduling. Do you think that's the way it's going to go now with this conference schedule being as tough as it is?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a whole lot of MAC and a whole lot of Mountain West for UCLA, USC, Washington, Oregon. A whole lot of Mountain West. For the Midwest, it's going to be a whole lot of MAC. And some of that is because of this incredible difficult schedules. I'm sometimes. In fact. 2 hours, an hour before I came on Ted's show tonight, I looked at the Gophers' schedule for the next 5 years. I started hyperventilating. I almost needed CPR to get through the night because it's going to be a struggle, Gopher fans, to get that magical 6 wins. I think a whole lot of MAC, a whole lot of Mountain West games is in order. And I think about, and I don't want to take your show off. Can I just talk about Notre Dame for a second?
The floor is yours.
Thank you, Ted. Look, the Big Ten schools, no divisions. They're willing to play each other. The big-time schools playing big-time schools more than ever. Across NBC, CBS, Fox, those 3 networks are going to be they're already cross-promoting each other's college games. The ratings are incredible this year, except for NBC, and me and Ted have talked about it. NBC is going to benefit the most with what's going to happen in 2004 and beyond. Things are going to change a little bit. Things are going to get better for NBC. This plethora of games, this depth in the schedule now, gives so much value to the Big Ten media partners. And each school, Illinois, Rutgers, Buckeyes, all the 16 fully invested schools, not so much Oregon and Washington yet, but your time is a-coming, is going to be making about $70 million in media money. We're not talking conference payouts. Conference payouts are going to be higher than that because you're going to throw in NCAA tourney credits, you're going to throw in bowl money, you're going to throw in college football playoff money, and it's all going to roll over, and eventually you're going to go over $100 million for conference payouts. But I'm talking just the media money. It's going to be about $70 million to start. Notre Dame's going to be trying to get in these negotiations with NBC, Ted. And they're asking for $65 million. $65 million now. 7 home games. About 3 or 4 of those not going to be any more valuable than Maryland versus Minnesota, to be honest with you, because they're going to be playing. You're right.
Their schedule, right? I grew up with Notre Dame having the toughest schedule in America, right?
Yeah.
USC was on their schedule. Michigan was on their schedule. Michigan State was on their schedule. And then they kind of throw in some other power teams in there as well. Their schedule this season is not great. You look at the big games that they have on their schedule this season, it just so happens that their biggest games are Big Ten teams. Ohio State, right? Yeah. We're coming off that game as well. USC is going to happen here in a couple of weeks. Some other home games on the Notre Dame schedule this year. Pitt, Wake Forest, Tennessee State, right, was earlier this season. Navy, Central Michigan. I just want to know what happened to the days where Notre Dame played the toughest schedule in America. I know they've got games sprinkled in the future schedules kind of down the road as well that are difficult.
Yeah, they play Clemson. They play Clemson this year.
Yeah.
They play USC this year. They already played Ohio State. And if you look at their schedule, there are those big games, but there are always those 3 or 4 home games. I'm just talking home game slate because that's the value that they give the NBC. There's always going to be 3 or 4 just not very valuable games, even though Notre Dame is this huge brand, incredibly valuable brand at NBC. We're not even arguing that. We're talking a standalone contract with a media partner. It is a hard road to hold. Just look at the Texas Longhorns, the the Longhorn Network.
Yep.
Once 5 in this world. They didn't have enough live content. They could not compete against the SEC network. Texas finally threw their hands in the air and said, we're not getting the exposure for Olympic sports like Florida is and Alabama is in the SEC network. SEC's networks everywhere. Everyone's talking about it in the South. No one's talking about the Longhorn Network. It's the same thing with Notre Dame. I think they're going to have I don't know how this is going to happen. I don't see NBC going, okay, $70 million to this each Big Ten school with this incredible depth and plethora of games, valuable games that we can cross promote with everybody. Oh, here's $65 million to Notre Dame for the 7-game home schedule. I don't know, Ted. I don't know.
I could talk about Notre Dame and that whole deal till I'm blue and gold in the face, but I'm not going to. I'm just not. This is not Notre Dame, Theodore. This is Big Ten Ted here. So we're gonna be. I got some questions to answer, and we kind of gotta fire through these because there's a few other topics that I'd like to get into with you here today. I'll answer this one right off the bat because I do know the answer. Casey, Iowa fan here, shows up a good amount. Big Ten championship game is going to be decided. The 2 best conference records, regardless, the 18 teams, whoever has the 2 best conference records in the conference will compete for the Big Ten championship game. Where that championship game will be in the future has been up for debate. I know there was a story about Las Vegas as well. I'd like to see it in a rotation of SoFi Stadium, US Bank Stadium, Lucas Oil Stadium, and then the Chicago's building an indoor stadium as well. I think that'd be.
We might have to memorize the tiebreakers every year.
Yes. Yeah. I think there's going to be a good amount of tie breaking here going on as well. Let's take a look at some of this other comments as well. Crab cakes in football. Will the Big Ten have 2 bye weeks? Helps athletes in schooling by starting a week earlier. TBD on that right now. Greg, do you have any insight? Do you think that could possibly happen?
I would guess yes. But it's just a guess at this point. I think we're all going to start a week earlier than normal. But we'll see. That's not official yet.
Yeah, not officially official. That's heard that a couple of times here tonight. A lot of things still ebbs and flows. Still kind of going through kind of everything here. Greg Flugaur joining us from College Football's Peek Around the Corner, talking everything schedule release and what things look like with USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington as well. So ACC. I just want to be very brief on this because I've got some other stuff to talk about. I know some people were like, well, we saw a schedule released before. And then it kind of got upstaged a little bit. We're pretty late in the process here, so I don't think we're going to get upstaged a little bit. But kind of going forward, do you see anything happening with the ACC and some of these Big Ten teams and possibly a move? I've talked to a lot of people on the subject. I'm like, that contract just seems so difficult to be able to get past right now.
I don't think how do I say this? Brett McMurphy on 365 Sports said it pretty directly, and I'm going to paraphrase it. He says he does not see North Carolina, he just said this last week, he does not see North Carolina, Clemson, and Florida State playing in the ACC 3 years from now.
Okay.
He says, how do we get from here to there? He doesn't know. I would anticipate and I'm not breaking any news here, and this is nothing I'm declaring. I'm just giving you my best shot, Ted, and I'm trying to be brief because I know you like briefness. I'm not a brief type of guy. I'll do as quick as I possibly can. I don't think this is something that somebody's going to win in the courts where they break the ground of rights in the ACC. I think this is going to be a bull rush. I think there's going to be a group of schools that bull rush the ACC altogether. Not so much collusion, but they all kind of know, wink, wink, nod, nod. They're all going to go together one day after another and say we are letting everybody know publicly that we intend to leave the ACC conference by July 1st, 2024, July 1st, 2025, whatever that date is, and we're looking for a settlement. SMU bought their way themselves into the country. Give us the opportunity for us to buy ourselves out of the conference.
Very, very curious to see what scheduling could look like, even with more teams possibly.
Yeah, I think we're not. Big Ten's not done growing. Let's put it down.
The way I see it, I think this all hinges, and I believe you've touched on this on your shows before. It seems like it all hinges on Notre Dame and that 2025 NBC deal, right?
Yeah. Well, they would make everything a whole lot easier if they pulled the trigger first. And
sure.
I think Notre Dame and Clemson and North Carolina, a couple other schools are waiting for Notre Dame to pull the trigger.
So let's talk more about what these scheduling moves kind of mean here today. Over the course of expansion, we've had, the first one was Penn State, right? That felt fairly Big Ten, right? Penn State was an Eastern independent power in the early 90s, and they seemed to fit. They had West Virginia, Syracuse was a significant series. They had other kind of schools in the Northeast as well, but that seemed to really fit. And then Nebraska, right? Another football power that kind of came over that fit the Big Ten that was kind of in the Midwest. Over there, Rutgers and Maryland were a little bit different, but for different reasons out there on the East Coast. This move, considering no divisions, just a different culture and lifestyle, it seems massive. It seems way more different in terms of an expansion move. Do you see the Big Ten really changing as a conference? How much of an impact do you see these 4 West Coast schools having on the football product? Because the way I see it, I think they're going to have to meet in the middle. Current Big Ten teams are going to have to get better on offense. Those 4 West Coast teams, looking at you, Big Ten West, and those 4 West Coast teams are going to need to get beefer on the lines, and they're going to need to get better on defense.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better, Ted. It's a massive, massive change for the Big Ten. You know what? I'm old enough to remember the Penn State edition. I'm an old guy. That was a big deal. That was what we're getting an 11th school. What? It's not in the Midwest. That was massive, and it took a long time for the Penn State fans to get really into being in the Big Ten. I mean, the conspiracies. We didn't have Twitter or X back then. If we did, the Penn State fans would have been just. Anyways, and the Nebraska felt right from the beginning, at least from my personal view. The Rutgers in Maryland, that was a market decision. Jim Delaney said we're going to become a 2-region conference. A whole bunch of Big Ten alumni live in those 2 big states, and that's just something that they were going to do. But this is different. This has now become a national conference. And I think there's going to be a few more pieces added in the Southeast and with Notre Dame, and that's going to be your Big Ten for the next generation. Massive. And you say they're going to have to meet in the middle? Probably. I would lean a little bit more towards maybe Washington and Oregon and USC and UCLA have to change a little bit more.
Okay.
Nebraska is still trying to figure it out. Nebraska, the beat writers, the people I've talked to, they still don't have the size that Iowa does and Wisconsin does, that Minnesota does. You're going to have to bring in more size, and they're going to have that opportunity. They're going to be able to recruit in the Midwest more than ever. USC, UCLA, Washington, Oregon. So it's going to be fun. It's going to be just so much fun. And then with this expanded playoffs, oh my gosh, Unbelievable.
Let's talk about the Big Ten West, because and I'm sure I'll get into this. We'll try our best. Because here's the deal, folks, for you Big Ten West fans out there. And Greg and I are both Big Ten West fans, right? We are on each side of the St. Croix River, right, Greg and I. So here's the deal. Oregon, Washington, USC, Ohio State, Michigan, Big Ten West fans, you got to adjust your expectations, because for 10 years now, since the East-West split, okay, you've been playing against each other. Okay, 6 out of your 9 conference games. Look at the flag. This way, over here. Look at the flag behind me. Look at all those teams. And your goal at the beginning of each and every single year is, let's get to Indy. That's our goal. That's our barometer for success. We get to Indy, and let's see what happens, right? Wisconsin got there a few times. Sometimes they were competitive. Sometimes they weren't. Let's just put it that way. Now those West Division teams don't have that, because even if you just look at the top 5 at the top, which are probably going to be USC, Oregon, Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, which that is half of the top 10 in 24/7 on 3 rivals recruiting rankings every single year. So you know there's going to be talent. You know they're going to be up there so many given years. For me, these West Division teams are going to have to find a new barometer for success. What is a successful season? Because then let's talk about the college football playoff, like you just mentioned. 12 teams right now. Who knows, maybe in 2026 it could go to 16 teams as well. But still, then you got to be a top 10 to a top 12 team in college football. And you look at the Big Ten West and how many times that's happened over these 10 years at the end of the season when they're playing in the championship game. I don't know, maybe half, probably a little bit less than half that they've been in that position. Where do you think, right? You're a Gopher fan. I'm a Badger fan. Where do you think the expectations are going to be for some of these programs? Can a Big Ten West team go toe-to-toe, head-to-head with some of those 5 specific powers? And I didn't even mention Washington. Didn't even mention Dante Moore and UCLA as well.
Woo! Boy. I mean, I suppose in theory, I mean, look, Wisconsin, I got to give it to Wisconsin. They did the move they had to make. They got Luke Fickell. They're already transitioning. They're already trying to do something different. So they're ahead of the game. Iowa's going to have to do that. Unfortunately, Iowa, it's going to take them longer to transition into something different. They got a coach who probably isn't going to leave on his own. They might have to show him the door. That's a program that needs a facelift. I mean, there's great things about that program, no question about it. But as Ted, you know, if you're trying to get to the college football playoffs, one of these Big Ten West schools, everybody's going to have to change. Wisconsin's already doing that, and the rest of us are going to be, far behind. Nebraska, you have the money, you have the NIL money, you have the facilities, but man, you've got to start turning it around.
It's got to happen sometime.
Huh?
It's got to happen sometime. You got to hit it sometime. I said this in the beginning of the year with Nebraska. Look, yeah, you had a close loss to Minnesota. You had a lot of almost. You got to see something and I know it's year 1 with Matt Rule. Yeah. And I get it, man. I get it. But you got to see something. And I know they're better in some areas of football than they were under Scott Frost already halfway through the season. I get that. But sometimes it's got to hit. It's got to hit sometime, and you got to see that. I think Wisconsin, like you said, with Luke Fickell, they're making that jump, right? Their offense is becoming a little bit more dynamic and can make some plays, right, rather than just lining up in the aforementioned. You mentioned Iowa, man. Here's the thing about the Big Ten going forward. Enough with the rock fights, right? You know, like in Iowa or somebody, it's just you're not getting, like, you could maybe win the division playing 6 or 7 rock fights a year. Look at Northwestern in the years that they won it in 2018 and 2020 as well. You can't win that way anymore. You need to have talent. You need to have talent to not, maybe if the Big Ten championship game is a little bit out of your grasp, to get into the college football playoff as well. Adjustments need to be, or things need to be adjusted in terms of expectations. I want to get your take on this. We talked about Friday night. We talked about Fox. We talked about some contrast of styles, the West divisions and their expectations. Do you think we'll see more games? We talked about a Friday night slot on Fox. I know there's been a lot of, let's just call them opinions about Peacock so far, not only on the football side, but the recently released men's basketball schedule as well. Do you think we're going to see more games with more teams in this schedule? Are going to we see more games on BTN or Peacock at the lower tier? Which one do you think gets more coverage?
I would be actually a little surprised. In regards to football, I don't think we're going to see more than that. What is it, 8 to 9 football games a year? Yeah. I know the number was 8 when it was first reported about this media contract, but I think they might have adjusted it to say 8 to 9. I don't think we're going to see more on Peacock when it comes to football. I think the whole Peacock thing's an experiment. It's putting your toe in the water. It's going to see what the numbers show up. When does streaming finally get here, in the sense of can the Big Ten bring in a streaming component 5-6 years from now in the next media contract that has actual tier 2, tier 1 games, the biggest games? Would that work? I know the college football playoffs, Amazon and Apple both have put in, or not put in bids yet, but have made it known that they're interested. They already did some presentation in front of the college football playoff committee, along with NBC and not CBS, but NBC, Fox, and ESPN, trying to get some of the college football playoff content, the expanded playoffs. So the Peacock thing, I think, is just a testing thing. So I don't think we're going to see an expansion on Peacock games for football. I think Fox and Big Ten Network are probably going to take the extra games.
Gotcha. Let's get to some other questions here before we get you out of here. Let's go here from Tony. Greg and Ted, do you believe the Big Ten will expand beyond 20? I'm going to say yes eventually. It might take them a while, but I think yes. I would love to see the combination. I can almost guarantee this will not happen, but I would love to see Florida State, Miami, Clemson, and Notre Dame come over as a pair from the ACC. North Carolina, maybe as a backup a little bit. What say you on going beyond the 20 mark?
I think they will go beyond 20 because I have been pretty aggressive saying that Notre Dame will be a Big Ten member at some point, and that's going to put them over 20 because I think they're going to get more than one school in the East, Southeast.
Sure.
So at least 21. Yeah, I would say yes. I believe Big Ten will go beyond 20.
Let's go to David Hall here. What happens to Notre Dame TV value once if Clemson, FSU, UNC leave for the ACC? So we're basically saying, if the Southeast schools pull the trigger first before that 2025 whatever mark the contract comes up, what happens to the Notre Dame TV value?
Yeah, exactly. And David Hall, great question, because let's say Clemson, Florida State, and USC aren't quite ready to pull the trigger first, right? Well, the threat of them pulling the trigger first has to make NBC wonder, right? This TV deal is for 2025, I believe, or at least the deal has to get done in 2025. The threat of the implosion of the ACC from NBC's perspective has to, again, weigh on them in figuring out the value of a future media contract with Notre Dame. Great question, David Hall. That all this is kind of connected. It's all weighing down. There's other things going on. These big super conferences are going to be able to make so much money in different revenue streams. They're going to be having these big data deals with these sports books. They're going to have massive NIL conference deals eventually. There's so many things that these bigger conferences can do that Notre Dame can't do as a standalone product.
All right, we got a couple more questions, and we're going to let's go to crab cakes and football. What does FSU and Miami or UNC do to the schedule if they get in the league, pretend they get out of the grant of rights fully and invited?
Well, I would expect, and I think Ted probably has nailed this right at the beginning of his show tonight. That whole permanent rival is probably going to be real tight, real limited. Let's pretend it's FSU, Miami, UNC, and Notre Dame or whatever. If FSU is probably only going to have one or two permanent rivals, right? UNC might have a permanent rival game with one of them. Maybe Penn State actually gets a rival, right?
We'll see.
We'll see. Yeah. So
I don't think they want one.
No, I don't think they want one either. The schedule gets even crazier, and the average wins for the Minnesota Golden Gophers goes from 3 to 2.
Boy, what happens with Big Ten West teams? Let's say you get a tandem of Miami and FSU if they go the rivalry route. Like, even if you get Notre Dame, say you get Notre Dame and North Carolina to get to 20 or whatever it is. Even if you get that, that's just another powerhouse as well. Here from Expedition Greg as well. My question, Ohio State and Michigan, no, that's not going to be moved from Thanksgiving weekend. That will always be, it's sacrilegious if it does get moved from Thanksgiving weekend. I think you're going to have a lot of the old Oak Bucket game, Oregon, Washington, USC, UCLA. I think a lot of those games are still going to be the last game of the season. Penn State, very interested to see how that thing all kind of goes around with the last game of the season, because I did see Michigan State was not on their schedule the first year. Maryland, maybe that's something that they could have. They played Maryland. I think for earlier when Maryland was in the conference, they played that the last week of the season. Boy, Greg, this 2024, it's going to be something else. It is going to be something like we have never seen before, right? We've been so used to this being a Midwest base conference and Big Ten football. When you close your eyes and you think, you picture something, and that picture is going to be completely different here this year. I want to thank you for coming on. Duck fans, we've got Doug Scott from the QB11 show here coming up right around the corner. But Greg, let everybody know you got watch parties this weekend. What you got coming up over there on Peek around the corner?
We're going to be doing a watch party at noon Eastern Saturday. We're going to be doing 2 games, the Buckeyes versus Maryland Terrapins and Oklahoma versus Texas. And then Saturday night, Michigan at Minnesota. And if you believe in David and versus Goliath, if you believe David has a chance, well, come watch us. Minnesota, Michigan watch party, Peek around the corner. Thank you, Ted, for having me on. I appreciate it, good sir.
I heard through the grapevine some were calling it the Saturday Night Slaughter, but you didn't hear it from me. You didn't hear it from me. You didn't hear it from me. Say your prayers.
I'm going to have a blanket in the studio. So if it gets real bad, I'm going to be hiding under the blankets. Okay. I just hope Darius Taylor plays. Yeah. We need him on the football field.
I said this last night on my live show. Just put up a better fight than Nebraska. I think that's got to be, obviously Minnesota, you want to execute, you want to do all the things that you should do. We are
not Nebraska. We are not Nebraska. We're going to put up a fight.
All right, Greg, thanks for joining me here tonight. You can catch him at College Football's Peek Around the Corner live shows, videos all the time over there. Greg, I'm sure we're going to talk soon, but until next time, stay good over there in the West Metro, okay?
Got it. You got it. Thanks, sir.
All right, thanks to Greg Flugaur from College Football's Peek Around the Corner for joining me here this evening, talking all things Big Ten schedule for 2024. We're going to be moving right along here as we now are pleased to be welcomed by Doug Scott from the QB11 show. Boy, oh boy, has it been a long time.
A couple days, right?
Couple of days, yeah. We talked Big Ten football on the QB11 show over there. Check out that podcast as well with Doug and QB. And you were talking about on that show, we're like, man, I got to have a schedule announcement. You spoke it into existence. Tony Petitti was clearly listening. He heard that you were talking Big Ten football, and he said, okay, we got to give Doug and QB the schedule.
Give us what we want. No, I'd heard a few weeks ago that the rumor that it might be released around this time, a few weeks from now, and so been anxiously waiting for it. It was like Christmas morning. And
All right.
and one of the things that was fun is, one of the things that was fun this morning, listening, I'm watching Twitter, I'm refreshing Twitter, and then I see your tweet, and you're like, I'm watching the release show, and it dawned on me the Big Ten, of course, is releasing it on the Big Ten Network in a show, and they have people talking about it, which is such a new concept for those of us coming over from the Pac-12. We're just not used to that, but I'm excited about having that, and I quickly turned on the Big Ten Network and watched for a while.
Yeah, and this was kind of a little bit different in the fact that before they sent out a notice to say, hey, in a few days, we're going to be doing the scheduling announcement. Now it was just, you heard some rumors of it. It kind of really started to build up early in the day. And they just said, and then Dave Rebson tweeted, oh yeah, we're going to announce the schedules in about an hour. So that's kind of how it was officially announced. So let's get into you from the Oregon side and maybe from the West Coast side of all these Pac schools kind of coming in and talking about all things Oregon in the Big Ten. What was your initial thoughts on the upcoming schedules for the Oregon Ducks?
Yeah, so, I mean, I fully expected only to have Washington as a protected rival, right? So I think there was some speculation that maybe it would be all 4 West Coast schools. I felt pretty confident that wouldn't be the case. I don't think USC would have wanted that, for one. And I also don't think the existing Big Ten schools or the networks, I think they want to bring these schools to have more of this cross play, right? Not just have them all play in a pod on the West Coast, if you will. So that didn't surprise me. Obviously, there was a lot of, rumors that Ohio State was going to be coming to Autzen next year. So I think that was it was good to see that brought into fruition. As you know, the game that they were supposed to come out here for in 2020 got canceled, due to COVID. So it kind of feels like a little bit of a makeup to that, and the return trip from the 2021 trip that we took out there. And hopefully the result is the same, but we'll have to wait and see on that one.
Oregon.
Going to the big house.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was about to say, Oregon, they showed them how to play Big Ten football that day. Very physical. I remember that game being against Ohio State.
Yeah, that was there. I think we talked about that the last time I was on. That was a super fun trip that I almost canceled, and I'm very glad I didn't. So I think that was exciting. Obviously, trips to Michigan and Wisconsin in the first year. That's exciting. The one thing that I did notice is that I don't know why my video looks great on my side. I don't know why it's so fuzzy on your side, but that's the technology in live broadcast, right? But the one thing I noticed is that the Oregon's home road split in conference games flip-flopped. So, in the Pac-12, we've played 9 conference games forever, as well as the Big Ten, but we've had 5 home games in odd years and 4 home in even years, and now we're flip-flopping it, so it kind of messes with our out of conference scheduling a little bit. We now have in 2025 and 2027 we have 6 home games and 6 road games, which is a little less than ideal, but we'll see if there's any changes to the out of conference schedule to try to adjust for that, or potentially get the Civil War game with Oregon State back on the schedule. But I'm not worried about it either way. It is what it is, and it'll fix itself over time, obviously.
What does the 24 schedule look like right now out of conference? And is there a possibility to have Oregon State?
So there's several ways to do it. Oregon actually plays 13 games in 2024 because of a trip to Hawaii, and there's an exception. The NCAA exception says if you're willing to go to Hawaii on a road trip, we'll give you an extra home game, to pay for it, right? So Oregon is scheduled to play Idaho, Texas Tech, and Boise State at home, and then to travel to Hawaii. And those are the first 4 games of the season. Then obviously the Big Ten schedule, home games against home games against Illinois, Maryland, Michigan State, Ohio State, and Washington, and then road games at Michigan, Purdue, UCLA, and Wisconsin. The ways to bring the Civil War back on, there's a couple ways. You could certainly cancel the Idaho game. It's an FCS game. That would be an easy way. You could look at canceling the Hawaii game or moving that out. It is it's a 3-game series with Hawaii. We've played 1 this year. Then the next 2 years, we have 1 next year, and then another one's further out that got rescheduled from the COVID year. That would be another way you could potentially do it. Although if you cancel the Hawaii game, you couldn't add Oregon State because you'd be over the limit then. So I don't think that would actually work. One of the ways I've kind of been favoring is, if you want to get the Civil War back on the calendar permanently, is you just cancel the Boise State and Utah State series, which run the next 6 years straight. And then that you just slide Oregon State into that spot, and you're covered think the challenges are right now is I think Oregon State is not willing to engage in that conversation at this point in time. I've also heard some rumors that their demands to play the game are very unreasonable as well. So we'll see how that plays out over time, though. It might just be have to take a couple of years off, and then maybe it gets fixed down the road.
Yeah, well, I'll hope it, because that was something that I thought was very unique. When Oregon and Washington both went to the Big Ten, they saw in their press releases, they said, we hope to play Oregon State. We hope to play Washington State, which you didn't see it from Oklahoma. You didn't see it from some of these other schools as well when we when we were talking about this as well. So let's start with the near future. Let's start with 2024. And I'll pop this schedule up here in just a minute. What was your initial thoughts and maybe some road trips that you were kind of thinking maybe about making as well? The initial thoughts of this initial schedule for the Ducks.
Yeah, so while you're bringing that up, initially I thought it just kind of overall looking at the whole Big Ten schedule, I think they did a really good job. Obviously, we knew about Flex Protect, and we knew about the protected rivalries and what that was going to look like, and kind of what they had done and announced a few months ago with the 16 teams. So, none of this deviates too far from that structurally, right? Obviously, other than fitting 2 more teams in. From an Oregon standpoint and looking around the rest of the conference schedule too, I think there's a pretty good job of balancing when you're looking particularly at the schools that are traditionally in the better performing schools and ones that are projected to be kind of at the top of the conference over the next 5 years. I think there's a good balance of playing those teams against each other, but also not stacking the deck in anyone's like massive favor over any of the years in this playout. So I think that they did a really good job with that. From an Oregon perspective, obviously seeing that Ohio State game at home, that was huge. And I think we're all hoping and expecting that. So that was a big one. Obviously keeping the Washington rivalry not just intact every year, but also on the same home road schedule, right? So we go to Washington this year. So of course we should host them next year and then continue rotating after that. So that was kind of a gimme, but one you like to see. Playing USC 3 times in 5 years and UCLA 3 times in 5 years. UCLA on the road next year also makes sense. The last time we played them was at home, so which was last year, so that fits in really well. Trip to Michigan, trip to Wisconsin, like who wouldn't love that? And that's to your point. How if I have to pick one, how do I pick between those two? We don't go to Michigan again in this 5-year cycle. We go to Wisconsin again in 2028. So maybe if I have to pick one, I go that way. But I know QB will be at the Wisconsin game. His family's from there. Wisconsin's kind of his second team, so I'm sure he's going to be trying to talk me into going to Camp Randall. And look, I'm all for it. That's one of the games I had when I talked to you last time that I had listed as a trip I want to make for sure.
Boy, Doug, we got to get you on State Street. We got to get you beer. We got to get you brats. The whole Wisconsin experience that I've experienced many times over. But I'm sure so maybe some parts.
Do you have like? Is it still? Do you have like a lot of types of beer, or is it kind of like the old school, like Milwaukee style lager?
Well, there's always going to be craft beer, but there all along State Street and all that. So there are breweries and other stuff like that. So there is a good variety. If you want to drink old style, if you want to drink PBR, got plenty of that. If you want to drink an IPA, there's also some of that over there in Madison as well. So you got options.
Excellent. Yes, I love the options, and I'm all in the bratwurst sounds even better.
So let's talk about it from a pack as a group, the 4 of them right now. What do you think as a whole? Because I think this is not just because you're on this show right now and I was on the show earlier in the week. I think Oregon is best set up and the way their roster and their culture is right now to translate success-wise into the Big Ten. But as a whole, what adjustments do you think that these Pac schools need to make now that you got your eyeballs on the schedule and kind of see some home and away? What adjustments do these schools need to make kind of going forward once they start playing the Big Ten?
Yeah, I'll go both ways on this one. I think the physicality, particularly in the trenches on both sides of the ball, is probably the biggest thing. And I think Oregon, like you said, has been the one team in the Pac-12 really since Mario Cristobal got here in 2017 as an offensive line coach, and then 2018 through 2021 as the head coach. Like, he really emphasized recruiting and developing talent in the trenches on both sides of the ball, big guys, SEC style, Big Ten style players, right? And, with some of them didn't hit, some of them did, but that mentality was there. And then Dan Lanning has just in it and put it to the 10th degree. I mean, Oregon recruited a ridiculous class last year of defensive line talent, particularly. They're doing it again in 2024. Their offensive line has been, in the top 5 to 10 of the country by most, most experts, Joe Moore Award finalists, stuff like that over the last several years as well. And so I think from the line standpoint, I agree with you that Oregon is best equipped out of the 4, even including USC. USC might have an edge in Oregon at overall skill talent, across the roster, but I think Oregon has more of that beef and trench talent that allows to compete in the Big Ten. So I think the answer to your second question is Washington, USC, UCLA, and even Oregon. They're gonna have to step their game up in those trenches, right, and really be compared to compete, and not just there, but across the positions, and just a more physical style of play that's very popular in the Big Ten, as you know. I think going the other way, I think some of the speed and the quarterback play that the West Coast teams are going to be bringing out to the Big Ten is also going to be adjustment for the existing Big Ten teams. They're going to have to get faster.
Yep.
Not necessarily Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, right? But down the roster, right? Those teams are going to have to put more, especially the Big Ten West teams have been kind of playing that Big Ten West round robin year after year after year. Now they have their game all spread out across all of the conference. Those teams are going to have to get more team speed.
I think Wisconsin they've got a little bit of a head start, right? With Phil Longo coming in, they're starting to recruit and they're starting to structure their team where they want to play a little bit more wide open and not like traditional where Wisconsin, where you line up in an I back, where you line up in a single back and you just run it like that with average quarterback play, right? Iowa, they're going to need to do something. You can't play like Iowa has played and expect to win 8 and 9 and 10 wins every year. It's just not going to happen. You can't play like that. So they're going to need to have to make some big is an understatement, some big adjustments, especially on the offensive side of the football. Defense, no question, they've got to figure it out. But it's not just them. It's Illinois. It's kind of these other schools that, like, you look at Illinois last year, very strong defensively. Offense, it's your lineup, pound the rock, and you don't have a ton of speed on the outside. Because we know, I said it just with Greg before you came on, the top, or I should say half of the top 10 recruiting rankings in the country are all going to be Big Ten teams, right? USC, Oregon, Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State. Now, there's some years where some of those drop to 12 or 13 or 15 or whatever.
Yeah, but if you look at it over a 4 or 5 year cycle, yeah.
Right, exactly, and Oregon is right there. USC, it's going to be extremely difficult. And we talked about it on the show earlier this week. West Division teams going to have to maybe adjust their expectations because there is no barometer that says, "Hey, we get to Indy just by winning the West Division championship as well." You kind of touched on no protected rivals with USC and UCLA. They're going to play them 3 times in 5 years. Were you disappointed in that? Would you like to play those teams more often?
Actually, no, I'm not disappointed in that because I want there to be more cross play among more teams. Like if it was I setting the schedule, I would go 1-8-8, right? Everyone gets one rival.
Sure. Everyone
play. You go 8-8, then you have a perfect 4-year rotation where everybody plays everybody. I understand. I'm the outsider coming into the existing Big Ten, so it's easy for me to say that, and maybe not as easy for Michigan or Michigan State to give up that game or move that game to every other year, or Iowa and their 17 rivalry games, and I get that. But no, I'm not disappointed because I'd rather play more teams. And look, we still got to go to LA 3 times in 5 years. We still got to play USC 3 times, which honestly is actually playing them more than we were in the Pac-12.
Sure. Yeah.
In the Pac-12, we played at USC once every 4 years, home once every 4 years. So 2 games in 4 years. The same thing with UCLA. So we played them 50% of the time. So now we're playing them 60% of the time. So we've actually increased, not decreased. So I think it's right. I think it's about right. Yeah.
Washington's going to be your last game of the year, most likely, with the Oregon State series in limbo. And usually those series, when these conference moves happen, get moved to September. Yeah. Does this heighten, right? You already, hate week is coming up, right? Husky hate week is right around the corner. Does this have in the last game of the season? Is this going to heighten that rivalry even more? Because I think I want to get your opinion on maybe the disdain and for them and really the feeling of the rivalry. But I see it as exposure, right? The last week of the season is what you always build up to, and having the exposure, of course, that Big Ten TV deal, and having that game, that Oregon-Washington game, maybe on a little bit of a bigger stage is certainly going to help as well.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I assume it will move to the last week of the season as well, and I'm all for that. I'm a big. I know there's some Oregon fans who want to keep Oregon State on that weekend, and I'm all about looking forward. So I'd love to have Washington on that weekend, and obviously we're going to be playing them here in 9 days. But that game moves around every year, right? It's always in a different place. There's no set It's not like Texas, Oklahoma, where it's the third Thursday in October, second, whatever it is, or Alabama and Tennessee and those kind of things. So I'm all for that being on a set day. And I do think that stage, and people will understand, like, there is a lot of, this is not a friendly rivalry. No, not a friendly rivalry. It's a heated rivalry. There's a lot of disdain and vitriol. And it's a clash of cultural differences, if you will, and how their programs operate and are built and how are made up, right? Oregon's flash and style, and there's no substance, and that's what the Washington fans will say, right? And Oregon fans will have their negative things to say about Washington as well. And so there's a lot of, and even right now, right? Oregon is a recruiting power. That's how they build their program, right? They're running it like an SEC team. They have all these coaches from the SEC. Washington is running it more as a developmental program, right? Not as strong a recruiting, hitting the portal strategically, building guys up over 3, 4, 5 years, right? So it's a very different clash of program development styles too, and coaching styles. So it's a lot of fun.
Well, when you look at schedules, and this is what this show is really all about, Washington, right? Wisconsin, if you're watching, Iowa, if you're watching, Minnesota, all those teams. Look at Washington. Look at what Doug just said about being a developmental program, because those are the Wisconsins, Iowas, those teams. Those are developmental programs. A lot of those coaches are saying, they're saying, we definitely are a developmental program. Look at Washington can do. You develop your guys. You strike gold on a transfer quarterback, and now all of a sudden you're the best offense, or one of the best offenses in all of college football. So that's the way I see. If you're not one of those top 5 right now, if you want to get up to that college football playoff level, that Big Ten championship level, there's a formula. Developing those guys in a base and then just hitting straight gold on some of these transfers. Do you think this is such an unknown? 2024 is such an unknown right now. Bo Nick's not going to be around. Michael Pennick's not going to be around. Caleb Williams not going to be around. J.J. McCarthy's not going to be around. There's such an unknown. Can you have expectations right now when you look at this 2024 schedule? Can you realistically have expectations? Or where do you kind of sit right now from your Oregon?
I think you can have preliminary. Yeah, sorry about that. I think you can have some preliminary expectations. Obviously, you got to see what happens with roster turnover over the course of the offseason, right? Because that will formulate and what the order of these games is in, right? Are we going to Wisconsin in late September, early October? Or are we going there in late November? Like, that's different, right? But also the roster turnover really being the biggest one, and what the transfer looks like, right? Who gets a transfer quarterback that's going to, be a big splash in those things. But yeah, from a preliminary standpoint, looking at Oregon's schedule, I think Oregon should win all of their out of conference games. And then you look at the 9 conference games and you've got, I think you'd say you should expect to win Illinois, Maryland, Michigan State at home. I would expect to beat Washington at home because I think they're turning over a lot more of the roster over the offseason than we are, and it's a home game again. And then on the road, okay, Michigan's going to be tough. Wisconsin's going to be tough. UCLA is going to be tough. You'd like to think you'd win Purdue. And then you got Ohio State at home as well. So, there's 3 to 4 games in there that, are losable games, even if you play your game, right? If you play your best game or play a good game, you could still lose. So that would be my expectation, right? Is falling somewhere right in that, 9 to 10 win rate. Oregon plays 13 games next year, so it's a little bit weird in that standpoint, right? So let's just say anywhere between 2 and 4 losses. How about that? And I think if you're at 2, you're in the playoffs. If you're at 3, you're on the borderline of the playoffs, because I think that's what we're going to see over the next few years too, is that a 3-loss team in this conference or the SEC has a shot. Not every year, but there's going to be 3-loss teams that make the playoffs.
Like you mentioned that, and that's a great point that I kind of look at USC's schedule. Got it up on screen right now. They got to play Michigan.
Brutal.
They got to play Penn State. They got to play Wisconsin. They got to play Washington, and they got LSU and Notre Dame out of schedule. Like out of conference, I should say. If USC loses to Notre Dame, if they lose to Michigan and Penn State, but they beat LSU, they say UCLA's better with Dante Morris, Washington, Wisconsin. Who says a USC 9-3 team is not a playoff team, right? Especially when we get in this new era when the Big 12, and we talked about this the other night, when the Big 12 is taking let's call it as it is, a massive step down in terms of in terms of what they are as a conference. Okay, and then you really 9-3 teams in the Big 10 and the SEC are going to be strongly considered over 11-1 or 10-1 or 10-2 teams from other conferences. I think that's just the way it is.
I would certainly say 10-2, and I would certainly say 10-2. Yeah, and I would say 11. I agree with you. The 11-1 Big 12 second place team versus a 9-3 USC with the schedule you just mentioned. I think that's it. It's going to be fun to watch how that plays out because it will happen eventually. It might not be next year, but it will happen.
I put out a tweet earlier this weekend about the struggles of the Big 12 this season and where they sit. And somebody tweeted the stats and where everyone is outside of Texas and Oklahoma. I quoted the tweet and I put a GIF of from the Christmas movie, The Island of Misfit Toys from Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, and you've got Yukon Cornelius and all the toys around him and everything. That's just, I'm sorry, I think the Big 12 is going to be extremely entertaining to watch. I think it's going to be that conference where you flip it on and you can see that Baylor come back against UCF like this past weekend or 2 weekends ago, whatever it was. It's a great example. You're going to see craziness in the Big 12. I think that's what they are. Are you going to see elite football in the Big 12? I don't know. Look at who are your top brands in that conference right now? Utah, Colorado's of course going to do some things with Deion and what he's doing, but at least that's how I see it.
It wouldn't be crazy if Colorado wins that conference next year because Deion's going to load up in the transfer portal again. Yep. That would not be crazy at all to me, and that's what I'm saying. Take whatever you think the best team in the Big 12 conference is next year, and drop them into the Big 10. How many games did they win? 8.
I don't know.
I mean,
that's tough.
There's not a good top end there. There's a very deep middle.
You're going to see a big difference, I think, starting in 2024, right? Because that's what these schedules are all about. Starting in 2020, you're going to see a lot of change. You're going to see the Big 10 and the SEC. They're going to have the financial advantage, the resources advantage, right? Of course, those two things kind of go hand in hand, and I think they're just brands and recruiting powers. Well, you're just going to see that.
As I say, the players are going to continue to flock to those two conferences at an even higher rate than they already are, too. Because I was actually listening to, I think it was one of the athletic podcasts this morning, and they were talking about specifically Texas and how many kids in Texas are committed to different schools. And the number of there's 77 blue chips in Texas in this cycle, and only 20 something of them are committed to future Big 12 schools. And that's Texas. That's where all the schools are. And they're all going to the SEC or the Big 10.
I know. It's like you thought Texas was the Longhorns. You thought they were a recruiting power in the Big 12. You put them in the SEC. That's tough to compete with. And now all of a sudden these schools in the Big 10, the Michigans, Ohio States, Penn States, now you got a little bit of a pipeline out to California and SoCal, and maybe those recruiting battles maybe heat up a little bit. Yeah, it is. The only one that's missing is South Florida, and who knows, that could maybe happen sooner than later, at least in this conference as well. This is very exciting. Beyond 2024, was there anything else on any of the other schedules that kind of stuck out to you? I only have the schedules for 2025 and 26.
Yeah, they obviously they released them all the way out to 2028, and I kind of charted who Oregon's playing, which teams they're playing multiple times over the course. So obviously they play everyone at least twice. But it was interesting to me, the teams that they play 3 times are Illinois, Michigan State, Ohio State, USC, and Michigan. So I thought that was really interesting. They're playing all the other biggest brands more times than, and conversely, when you look through the other schedules, you see that, right? They've really put the brand on brand matchups a little bit more frequently than otherwise. So, which is smart. And obviously I'm sure the TV networks and Fox and stuff had a hand in that, but that's exciting too, because that's better games for fans, right? So it's more good games. We talked a little about the California rotation as well. 2027, that year, looking out there, and I know you don't have the graphic for that, but for Oregon will play Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan that year. as well as UCLA and Washington and Nebraska also. And yeah, so that year looks like, ooh, that doesn't look fun. That's a gauntlet. If you can make it through that and make the playoffs, that's a good year.
Well, here's the thing as well, and we'll kind of end on this, is another thing when you take a look at all of these schedules is I think you see a lot better matchups, right? You see a lot of really good contests that you're going to see throughout the year. Oregon, in terms of this TV exposure with CBS, with NBC, I had Greg on possibly before talking about a possible Big Fox Friday night type of time slot as well. These bigger games are going to end up on CBS. They're going to end up on NBC that are hosted out on the West Coast. We talked about this even back in August as well. How much do you think the TV exposure is going to help in some of these other games, in maybe help in recruiting for Oregon to maybe get to a team that's maybe 9th, 10th a year in recruiting to maybe something that's 5th, 6th, 4th, something like that?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly can't hurt. Oregon's actually done pretty well with time slots over the last several years. They've got about half of their games on network TV before the late hour, right? So they're playing about half their games in time slots. But the thing is, if those games are Oregon versus, Colorado, like this year, or this year's different with Colorado, but like a better example, maybe Oregon versus an Arizona school or a Stanford or Cal or even an LA school. Nobody in the Big Ten is necessarily, even though the game's on at 12:30, the Big Ten folks aren't necessarily watching that, right? Because they don't care. It's not a Big Ten game. It doesn't really affect the Big Ten. But now it is a Big Ten game, right? So even though Oregon may not be playing any more games in those slots, there's going to be more people interested in it because that's a conference foe and you want to see what's going on. Or the team they're playing is Wisconsin or Iowa or Penn State or whoever, or Ohio State or Michigan, obviously being other ones. So, I mean, I kind of look through the schedule and I see 4 games that I think Oregon would definitely have next year on a network slot. And then you see maybe 2 or 3 more that could be, right? So that's about half. And then, your other half, you're on Big Ten Network or a Peacock or, they're spread around. Or you have a late night game against Boise State being on a Friday night slot or a Saturday late night slot if Fox wants to do that. So I think it's great. And that, like you said, that exposure is only going to be more because there's going to be more people watching those games.
Well, when you look at this schedule, I think that's a big thing as well, is you're going to have a lot more, dare I say, interested fan bases. I talked with Greg with that in the first hour of the show today, is how often are Stanford, Cal, Arizona State fans watching Oregon versus Washington State? You know what I mean? And then I think you're going to see a lot more of these Big Ten fan bases really latch on to, what's Oregon doing out against Wisconsin? What's Oregon doing against Illinois in certain games like that? Would you agree with that kind of coming from the West Coast, is that you're going to be stepping up to fan bases? And, of course, you're going to be stepping up on better TV slots as well, but stepping up to fan bases that kind of care more about football.
1,000%. Like, here's an example. Go last weekend, go to Twitter, find tweets from Cal and Stanford, both hosted Pac-12 conference games. Both of their stadiums are completely empty. They just don't have fan bases. And, if you look at it honestly, like Oregon and Utah have rabid fan. They fill up their stadium every week. Utah's fan base is very rabid. It's not very big. Oregon has a national following that they've built over the last 30 years. And then obviously they do really well in attendance. And then Washington State has a really good fan base, but it's really tiny, right? Their fans are good, but they're not a lot of them. With the Big Ten teams, their fan bases are huge. They're enormous, right? And even the teams that go 6-6 every year fill up their stadiums, go to road games, right? We had Nebraska out here a few years ago. Those people showed up in droves, right? Like people, like I was at the game last weekend against, or 2 weekends ago against Colorado. Even all the buzz around Colorado, no Colorado fans there. None. It was. They had an entourage that was huge, but nobody came to the game. You go, any of those games, outside of, like I said, you get a Utah fans will travel a little bit. Obviously, if it's a game against Oregon State, they'll come down, or Washington will come down because it's a drive. But yeah, it's gonna the difference in fan attention is just, it can't even be understated or overstated because it's just so enormous. And that's ultimately why the Pac-12 is dead, because there just isn't enough fan bases that care out here. It's the hard truth that people don't like to hear, but it's true.
And that's exactly where we find ourselves here right now. Doug, I want to thank you for joining me here tonight. 2024 can't get here soon enough. It's going to be exciting, but there's still a lot of excitement out in Eugene, Oregon. Man, that's a team that I think could really contend. That's a team that could really – there's a lot of great Pac-12 football on the horizon. Tell the folks where they can find the QB11 show and what you guys got on tap here in maybe the next week or so.
Yeah, so first of all, watch the Oregon versus Washington game coming up on the 14th. It's on the 3:30 Eastern slot, 12:30 Pacific. So it's on ABC. So definitely check that out. I think Game Day will be here, I'm pretty sure, as well. So you can follow us at QB11 Show on Twitter. You can find our show. It's QB11 Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. We actually just put out an episode this morning where we kind of did a first half season review through 5 games. So 2-hour episode, just kind of breaking down all of the statistics and the team and who's doing what. And then we'll start Husky Hate Week with all of our previews of that coming up on Monday. And then tomorrow we'll have a kind of a recap of this, talking about this, our schedule release for next year, as well as previewing our week 6 picks, which obviously don't include Oregon, but the rest of the games there. So QB11 Show on Twitter, or find us on all of those places. Thanks, Ted, for having me back.
No problem. You're going to be around a lot more. Let me just tell you that one. Once we get to 2024, you're going to be seeing some more Doug here on the channel. So Doug, thanks again for joining us here tonight.
Sorry, you have to see me here now.
From the QB11 show. Thanks to Doug here for joining us here tonight. It's all about schedule release here tonight, and we are going to wrap things up here with one more guest on the docket. And boy, we had to kind of separate these two because we got Oregon over here and now we've got Washington over here as we welcome in our good buddy Roman Tomashoff from Sports Illustrated, Fansided, everything over there. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's a great day. Looking forward to the future and kind of what's to come. Let's kind of talk about that because the first thing that I really want to talk about with the schedule release is Washington. Right off the bat in 2024, you guys got USC, you got Michigan, you got Oregon, and you got Penn State right off the bat. It's not going to be easy to start things off.
No, definitely not. And I it's going to be coming out on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Huskies. One of the things that we kind of went through and did was we kind of just picked out one game per year for a road trip. Since Michigan and USC have to come to Washington, one thing that I'm really excited about with Michigan having to come back up here is just kind of making up for the canceled game in 2020 due to COVID. So I know that's going to be really exciting, and that's just going to be a packed house. That's just going to be a fantastic way to just kind of introduce Husky fans to the Big Ten and just kind of what's next. But yeah, no, you're right. It's going to be a really, really tough slate, both at home and on the road. That trip to Penn State's not going to be easy. The trip going out to Rutgers isn't going to be easy either, but that's more distance than it is anything else. And me being somebody who used to live in the state of Massachusetts, just going to New Jersey anyways is, it's its own thing. Just taking shots as I do whenever I come on here. But yeah, I mean, like mainly at Michigan State.
How'd that go for them? Anyway, all right, let's move on. So there you see the schedule. Washington up on the screen. Away games at Penn State. He talked about at Oregon, at Iowa. We'll see if they have their offense turned around. But going to Kinnick is never an easy thing to do. So right off the bat, that's 2024. Were there any other schedules, any years of schedules? I got 2024, 25, and 26 up here. So more recent schedules. Were there any other years that kind of stood out to you, maybe in terms of difficulty or maybe some road trips that you talked about that might interest you?
I gotta pull it up real quick because there were a couple that really did stand out. But I mean, just kind of right off the bat, 2024, I think, is just going to be something to watch. And the biggest reason why, I remember we talked about it the last time I came on here, was the fact that there's just going to be so much turnover on this Husky team. Mm-hmm. There's a possibility that there are 14 or 15 new starters on this team next year. So there's just going to, and I'm assuming a decent number of those guys are probably going to come to the transfer portal, but I'm very curious to see just what might be next for this team and getting that introduction of, having to go to Penn State, having to go to Iowa, getting Michigan coming in. It's just going to be a really, really big test of not only what the roster is made of and what that might be looking looking like moving forward, just kind of what Kalen DeBoer and his coaching staff are going to be looking like as well, because there's a really, really good chance that there's a new offensive coordinator next season as well. Like, let's be real here, we'll call a spade a spade. Ryan Grubb is the highest paid offensive coordinator in the country, and there's a really good chance he's going to be a head coach by this time next season. So there are a lot of questions about this Husky team moving forward, and I think it's going to hold nothing but great things. I think that Kalen DeBoer is just a fantastic coach and a very smart guy in terms of his hires off the field as well. So it's going to be just a big year of question answering. But when you kind of look at the schedule, I think that the biggest year for me personally that stood out was probably 2026, because there's going to be a whole lot of just fun opponents to go to on the road. They go back to Michigan State. Again, we saw how that worked out. Then Nebraska, Oregon, Purdue, and USC is the rest of the away schedule. And then the home schedule just kind of, it's a ways down the line, but it's not necessarily the hardest year in that terminology, where it's Indiana, Iowa, Minnesota, and Penn State, where that's still a good slate of schools, but getting them at home is going to be just huge for the Huskies, even though, that's 4 years away at this point.
Yeah. I think this about Washington going forward, and you could probably say the same about Oregon as well, as much as you might not like to hear that. But these are going to be transfer portal destinations. I'm going to specifically focus in on the Washington Huskies. Like, look, what people are going to look a lot at what happened with Michael Penix. Like, we know here in Big Ten country what he was at Indiana. Sure, he had a good 2020. But we didn't see this coming. And a lot of people that are kind of maybe in that Michael Penix range are going to see, well, I can take that next step that Michael Penix took and really develop right there. I just think Washington is going to be a top transfer portal destination for a quarterback. Do you kind of feel the same way?
Oh, absolutely. There's a guy in the program right now named Austin Mack, who's just a high rate 4-star who enrolled early to come up here, but that doesn't ever exclude the fact that a transfer kid might come in and take the job. And it's not, for me, it's not even just quarterback. This has become a top transfer portal destination for just players in general. Because if we look around just at every position right now, Jalen Polk, one of the best wide receivers in the country, is a transfer. Josh Cuevas is going to be a great tight end over the next couple of years, transfer. Dylan Johnson, starting running back, is a transfer. Their best cornerback, Jabbar Muhammad, is a transfer. If you just look all over the field, there are transfer portal guys all over the place. And yeah, you're right. It starts with the quarterback and Michael Penix and everything that has been done there. But going forward, especially with the way that college football is evolving in the world of recruiting and the portal itself, that this is just going to be a place where, I can look up there in Seattle and, I can just be a plug and play kind of guy, and they're going to utilize me the right way, especially on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, exactly. So Washington is the only team, 2024 Washington, the only time in these release schedules, at least, the only time a West Coast team out of the West Coast 4 plays all of the other West Coast teams. So in 2024, Washington will play USC, they'll play UCLA, and Oregon. And kind of going off that point, were you disappointed? Did you expect USC and UCLA to be protected games?
Not necessarily. I honestly didn't even think about the fact that that's the only time they play all three schools until right in this moment. But I wouldn't necessarily say that I'm disappointed, and not even being as somebody who grew up in Los Angeles. I love making that trip down there. But I'm just really excited to just kind of see the Big Ten as a whole and just see everything else that the conference has to offer, where it's, oh, cool, yeah, Northwestern's coming up in a couple of years. Here's, I got to go to Minnesota, to Purdue, to Indiana, wherever it might be. I think that that's really exciting. And just kind of getting that just diverse inclusion of just, I get to go to all these different places is a lot more exciting, in my opinion, than just, you got to play UCLA and USC every year as well.
Well, that's the thing, I think. When these PAC schools came in, of course, it started with USC and UCLA, and then it eventually branched out to Oregon and Washington. They wanted to come in because they wanted to play Ohio State. They wanted to play Michigan. Right. They wanted these big-time games, and of course, the reason they were coming in, they wanted these big network time slots, and they wanted to be in these big. And I think that's when it comes to a scheduling perspective. I think the network says, well, instead of seeing UCLA and Washington every year, we can see Washington against Wisconsin, the battle for UW. We can see all of these other matchups that could be really interesting and intriguing that a lot of people would end up being interested in. We talked about Washington and where they might stand in 2024, but For me, I think, this league is going to be extraordinarily tough for everybody kind of complaining about, oh, that schedule's tough or our schedule's tough. Everybody's schedule is going to be hard. How do you think Washington is going to adjust with this increased competition? Can you expect, because they've made a college football playoff, who knows maybe what happens for the rest of this year? Where do you see the increased competition? How is that going to affect this Huskies program?
I think it's just going to do nothing but bring out the best in everyone on the roster and the coaching staff as well. Especially when, and it all starts with Kalen DeBoer, right? He's a guy that I expect to be around for the long haul, just kind of not only just with what his actions have been like on the field through just a season and a half, really, but just the person that he is off the field. He seems to be really, really invested in this program and just winning. And one thing that he just does everywhere that he goes is he wins. And this kind of feels like the place where he can really just kind of just set down his roots and build up exactly what he wants with the financial resources that they can provide him, especially with all this money from the Big Ten that's going to be coming in. And that's something where he has just in a year and a half truly changed almost everything about this program from where, and this is coming from somebody who loves Chris Peterson. Chris Peterson was very kind of set in his ways against a lot of things like publicity. And they didn't even really run a Heisman campaign for Jake Browning in 2016. Yeah. It's kind of insane. And Kalen DeBoer has come in and right away just kind of changed all that and just brought the program up to speed and just said, if you want to win a national championship, which I know is what my goal is, then these are things we have to do. So going forward, it's just really going to be nothing but just the highest of standards, in my opinion.
So a lot of people out there, and I understand why they're talking about this. And believe me, look at the text above my head, and I love that they're talking about it. People are saying the Big Ten, what do we got? Half of the top 10 in the country right now because USC, Oregon, and Washington. But you are going to have turnover, right? We talked about it from a Washington perspective. We know Oregon, we know USC is going to have some turnover as well. Michigan as well, right? Probably going to lose J.J. McCarthy. There's going to be 2024 is going to look completely different, not only in this conference, but all across the country with the 12-team college football playoff as well. How do you think Washington can stack up with all of this change going on? We talked about turnover, that they might be a top transfer portal destination, but how do you see kind of 2024 playing out possibly for the Huskies?
So I think a lot of it is just going to end up with who plays quarterback. They'll have 4 guys on the roster by that point, including a true freshman who'll be coming in. And I think that that's really going to define the season. But as I was kind of looking over this conference schedule, it kind of feels like there is a legitimate path for this team to have 8, 9, 10 wins. For this to kind of, with what Kalen DeBoer has been able to build, and with the system that he has installed on the offensive side of the ball, with just a couple just correct choices in player personnel, that there really won't be that much of a drop off. And who knows what some of these decisions might be or how these things will work out or injuries or anything like that. But as long as in my opinion, as long as Kalen DeBoer's system is in place, that this is going to be just a top 10 offense in the country year in and year out, and just a destination where everyone is going to want to come play because they know that this team is going to throw the ball over the yard, rack up a ton of yards and a ton of points, and just be competing every single week.
So I asked this, and that's interesting that you say that, because I think Kalen DeBoer was kind of mentioned last season as maybe a head coach that could maybe be in some coaching searches kind of down the road. Do you think this move to the Big Ten almost ensures you're going to have Kalen DeBoer as long as he wants to be the Washington head coach?
Absolutely. I honestly, truly, that's even if the Pac-12 was still a thing and it stayed together by whatever miracle, I really do think that Kalen was going to stick around anyways.
Okay.
Because that's just the kind of person that he is. And his whole thing just throughout his coaching career has always been just with a place like Washington in mind. And that's the thing that I feel like gets lost sometimes among Washington's recent history, is that this has always been one of the premier programs in the country. And yeah, there were some dark days with the Ty Willingham era. And Steve Sarkisian kind of brought the program back to life, but not really. And then Chris Peterson infused life into it, and Jimmy Lake almost took it all away within the span of a year and a half. But as this is what the Washington of the 80s and 90s was. Not that I was alive for the majority of the 90s, but that's just what this program was. This program could be a top 10, top 15 program in the country every single year.
Yeah, I'm excited to see where they really end up. I think they can be at the top of maybe that tier that's knocking on the door, right? That could maybe be right there. That's why I think that Wisconsin game is going to fit so well in terms of a potential rivalry, because they're both UW, and I think they're just both right at that level where they're going to be knocking on the door to some of those programs that consistently recruit in the top 10, like your USCs, your Oregons, your Michigans, your Penn States, and your Ohio States. All right, before we let you go tonight, I got to talk about, we got Doug mentioned Husky Hate Week. All right, I got to talk about it. Do you guys are you guys refer to it as Hate Week as well, or kind of?
Oh, absolutely. It's a double hate week. Since both teams had the bye, it's a double hate week. It's great. Like that's just really what it's all about, because the rivalry, and this is something, it's really, like, truly, and I know this is coming from somebody who lives on the West Coast and has always just been this way. It is on the Michigan, Ohio State level of hatred. Like it really, really is. Just anybody who just loves watching Twitter exchanges between two people who just really want to yell into the void, I highly recommend any argument between an Oregon fan and a Washington fan, because that's really all it is. And yeah, no, it's absolutely just going to be hate week. And I can't wait to just turn that factor up to 11 starting Monday.
Well, I've heard it from not just you, from a lot of other people, that this is a very underrated rivalry in terms of college football rivalries. And I'm excited, right? We're still talking schedule and networks, of course. This could be on a Big Ten Saturday night on an NBC. This could be in a mid-afternoon on a CBS. And of course, with being a more nationwide conference and having these teams in the Big Ten, I got to think a rivalry like this is going to be turned up to 11, kind of as they say. How do you view this game going down in a couple of weeks? Because, man, when I look at this one, you got two offenses that are humming right now, it appears, with Bo Nix and Michael Penix. But this just seems like it is just going to be an awesome battle, an epic battle.
Oh, you're absolutely right. I have a feeling that we're going to look back on this season, no matter what happens. And this is coming from somebody who clearly does not have a dog in the fight with this flag behind me, but this could end up being the game of the year.
Yeah.
Just in college football as a whole, because there's going to be a whole ton of points. I wouldn't be surprised if there's 900,000 yards at the end of this game. And I've been over on my podcast, Locked On Huskies. This entire time I have just been saying Oregon, and this is where Oregon fans get really mad, and it's kind of easy and fun for me to just kind of say this, where Oregon's 101st ranked strength of schedule, I said their defense hasn't played anybody yet. Their defense hasn't really been tested. And all I see is, Oregon's defense is way better than last year's. It's like, okay, that's great, and that might be true. But they still haven't played anybody. That doesn't excuse like Portland State, where Washington's strength schedule is 40th right now, where there still really are questions about some of their opponents. But this battle is really going to come down to Oregon's pass rush against Washington's offensive line. Washington should be getting back left guard Julius Bueller. Oh no, I'm sorry. Go right ahead.
Nope, I'm listening, and I am loving all this right now. So keep it coming.
So that's kind of where I see this battle playing out. Michael Penix got sacked like 5 times last year, truly, he got sacked twice against Arizona, but was only sacked once before then. Oregon's pass rush has been awesome this year. They have 18 sacks. They're doing a great job. But if Michael Penix has just any time back there to sit back, do what he wants, he's going to pick apart this Oregon secondary. I don't care how much it's improved over the last year, because Michael Penix is the nation's leading passer for a reason. And a lot of that is due to him and his incredible arm talent, and a lot of that is due to the best wide receiver core in the country. Jalen McMillan has missed the last 2 games due to injury. He's going to be coming back. Jeremy Bernard, the transfer from Michigan State, who I just love bringing up on this show for, no obvious reasons, as usual. But he's been fantastic. Jalen Polk, the Texas Tech transfer, has been fantastic. Roma Dunze has been the best receiver in the country this season. Like there's no ifs, ands, or buts about the play that he's just put out there on film this season. And I really don't care who's in Oregon secondary at this point. That's just too much to contend with for any secondary in college football, really.
I can't wait for this one to go down. I put a poll out on my YouTube channel and says, hey, you guys want to see some coverage of future Big Ten teams? Only when they're playing each other. And about 70% of them said, let's do it. So we might be contacting you here in a little bit, here in a week or so, to maybe do some Oregon, Washington. And then we might be having a three-man panel, so to speak. So we might be having a little bit of a battle, which I couldn't be. I am grinning from ear to ear seeing a Oregon Washington debate possibly here take place on this channel as well. Like last year, I'm looking at the score now, 37-34. Washington was able to edge Oregon at the end of that one. I remember watching the highlights of this one back a little bit, and that was another fantastic game last year. So we could very well see the same this season. Do you think this is a team? Beginning of the year, speaking of the wide receivers, I said Ohio State was the best wide receiving core in the country. Now, and maybe they don't have the quarterback like a Michael Penix to really put the talent on display. And I would say maybe Washington has kind of surpassed them. But do you think Washington and Oregon, do you think these are the two best offenses in the country?
As much as I hate to do this, I do want to give USC its flowers too. Okay. Because any offense that's led by Caleb Williams just needs to be considered in that conversation with everything they do down there. But I would say it's definitely two of the top three, with USC being that other cog in this, where you could really order them in any way you want and probably be okay with that. I personally would go Washington, USC, Oregon. And that's it's not because it's hate week or anything like that, but I just think that what Washington and USC are able to do down the field has been just a little bit more effective than Oregon recently, where just you look at the average yards per attempt for all three quarterbacks, and that's kind of where the edge is for me personally.
So let me push back, and I know I'm an don't you know Minnesotan here in the middle of Big Ten country, so I'm still learning a little bit about these teams. But you've got USC above Oregon, despite, let's call it as it is, a terrible defense.
Oh, I'm talking offenses only. Defense is Oregon's defense.
Oh, I thought you were a power ranking team.
Oh, no. I was power ranking just the offenses there.
Offenses. Okay, yeah, I'd agree with that. So if you are going teams right now, like for me, like I said, I'm kind of watching from a distance this year. I think Washington and Oregon 1A and 1B, and then you step down to someone like USC. Would you agree with that?
So
or would you put someone above USC?
Yeah, I'm at the point where I would put, and I've gotten some pushback from USC fans, which I find hilarious. I would probably, Utah with the loss kind of knocks them down, but Washington State does deserve to be in this conversation.
That's true. Yeah.
Washington State has been fantastic this season, and Cam Ward is doing some great things, and their defense looks really good too. And as long as Alex Grinch is the defensive coordinator at USC, they're getting a notch down strictly because of that for me.
I don't understand, right? We're talking Big Ten schedules and Washington and all these four schools. How Alex Grinch and Brian Ferentz still have jobs is beyond me. I don't get it. I said this, man. Alex Grinch has got to have some sort of blackmail on Lincoln Riley. There's no other way to describe it.
That is the only logical outcome at this point.
Alex Grinch probably, because he was still the DC over at Oklahoma when Lincoln Riley was over there, he might have cost him at least one national championship. I honestly think there's an argument for that. I want to thank you for joining me tonight. I can't wait for 2024. I can't wait for the start of this season. The schedule release has been a long time coming, and we could be seeing dates here maybe in the next month or so, which is going to be interesting as well to kind of see when these matchups take place. I think then that kind of adds another level to this as well. But let everybody know where they can find you, what you got coming up here on Locked On Huskies.
Yeah, so you can follow me on Twitter at rtomashoff34. You can follow our show Twitter at Locked On Huskies. Check out my co-host Lars Hansen as well at Lars Hansen on Twitter. Tomorrow, since Locked On is a daily podcast, we are going to be doing the same exact thing. We're breaking down just Big Ten schedule release. And then Lars and I, which I thought was really fun, just gave one road destination each. I want to give a shout out to the good people at Northwestern. My dad got his master's degree there. So I had to make sure that they got a shout out in the course of that episode. And then next week, it's going to be Oregon Hate Week. So there's just going to be a whole lot of, I'm probably going to try to push some buttons as much as I can. We're going to do some really fun collaborations. We're going to have my buddy Spencer McLaughlin of Locked On Ducks and Locked On Pac-12 on the show as well. But yeah, just tune in. Feel free to subscribe to us on YouTube and wherever else you get your podcast. And then check out all my written work as well on Inside the Huskies, which is Fan Nation Sports Illustrated at si.com/college/Washington.
Always a good time when Roman is on here. I can't wait to watch Oregon and Washington here in a couple of weeks. We might be getting a hold of you to do an Oregon-Washington preview, so we might be talking to you then.
Whenever you need me, I'm always around. Thank you so much for having me.
That's why the best ability is availability, and Roman might have the best ability here in the biz. Thanks again for Roman for joining us here tonight on the program. So that'll kind of wrap things up. The schedules, that's what it's all about, right? We are starting to see things come to fruition here in 2024. Big weekend of Big Ten football. Ohio State, Maryland, Rutgers, Wisconsin, Iowa, Purdue, Michigan, and Minnesota. Big thanks to Greg Flugaur for joining me in the first hour, as well Doug Scott from the QB11 show, and of course Roman Tomashoff from Inside the Huskies and Locked on Huskies as well. So until next time, I'm Big Ten Ted. We will see you in the next one.